presentation. Yes. Okay, so today, I guess we wanted to offer a way of thinking about hyperbaric oxygen therapy that goes beyond its well-established biological mechanisms, right? And we place it inside a broader biological, behavioral, and ritual system of recovery. So the central idea is that HBOT is not only a biological intervention, it is also a ritual intervention. And when we understand how HBOT is ritualized, we can better explain things that often get treated as secondary or anecdotal, right? So like why patients might report emotional shifts early in treatment, why adherence patterns look the way they do, right? And why veterans might say things like, it gave me myself back. So to show this, I am weaving together 3 different frameworks. The trauma loop model from Devin, Hinton, and Lawrence Kirmayer, ritualized behavioral cycles from Daniel Lende, and interaction ritual chains from Randall Collins. So together, these give us kind of a unified way to understand how HBOT works across multiple symptoms at once, not just in the brain, right, but in daily life, motivation, and identity. So TBI is not just disrupting one system, right? It's disrupting all 3 of these symptoms simultaneously. At the biological level, we see changes in metabolism, inflammation, and connectivity. At the behavioral level, we are seeing changes in motivation, routine, and social engagement. And at the social emotional level, we are seeing disruptions in belonging, identity, and meaning. So most current models treat these domains separately, right? We're measuring brain signals over here, behavior over there, and social function somewhere else entirely. But the lived experience of a traumatic brain injury does not happen in these kinds of pieces, right? It's happening all at once. And so the goal of this presentation is to propose HBOT as a multi-domain intervention, right? One that works across all 3 of these symptoms simultaneously. So Hinton and Kirmayer give us a great way to understand trauma, right? Trauma in this context is not a symptom, trauma is a loop. So their multiplexed loop looks like this, right? A trigger leads to physiological arousal. That arousal produces distressing symptoms. Those symptoms are interpreted catastrophically, which leads to more fear, more arousal, and the loop reinforces itself. So this is what is described as a closed loop of suffering. So ritual matters here because they are, right, one of the very few mechanisms that can intervene across all of these domains simultaneously. Because we know that rituals shift physiology through autonomic regulation, affect through shared emotional experience, meaning through narrative and identity, and social bonds through connection. So this is why HBOT might produce changes that feel bigger than symptom reduction alone, right? It unintentionally does exactly what healing rituals do, right? They interrupt trauma loops by adding predictability, structure, relational safety, and meaning. So Lende shows us something crucial, right? Behavior does not just express emotion. Cycles of behavior actively regulate emotion. So in his work on addiction, he identifies a 5-step ritualized cycle: ambivalence, seeking, holding, using, and return to ambivalence. So what's important here is not just the chemical effect of whatever substance people are using, right? It is the emotional relief that is coming from the pattern itself. So it is from the predictability of the sequence. And this shows us really 3 critical things, right? That rituals regulate affect even before chemistry enters the picture. Emotional relief is tied to pattern and predictability, and people become attached to the rhythm, not just the reward. So now looking at this through the HBOT lens, right? HBOT is scheduled, it's repetitive, it's socially predictable, it's structured, and that means the protocol itself becomes a regulating ritual cycle. Patients may feel grounded and calmer, not only because of the oxygen physiology, but because their emotional life is being reorganized, right, around a stable rhythm. So now Collins gives us really the social engine underneath all of this, right? He says that human life is structured through interaction ritual chains, which he defines as not those great big moments we're thinking of when we think of ritual, right? But these are the small repeated social moments that generate emotional energy, or EE, right, which he defines as motivation, confidence, initiative, group solidarity, right, and sacred objects charged with meaning. So for a ritual to succeed, it needs 4 basic ingredients, right? It needs bodily co-presence, barriers to outsiders, a mutual focus of attention, and a shared mood, right? And so when those elements come together repeatedly, people become emotionally energized, bonded, and motivated to return. So we argue that HBOT sessions contain all 4 of these ingredients, right? Veterans are co-present, they are separated from outsiders, they are focused on a shared healing task, and they often share a mood of cautious hope or a dedication to other veterans, right? So now, on the other hand, when these rituals break down, we lose that emotional energy, we lose solidarity, we lose meaning, and trauma is one of the clearest examples of that breakdown. So if you think about the veterans' reality, right, it's kind of a perfect storm of ritual disruption, ritual breakdown. So for many veterans, right, TBI and PTSD, they are not just disrupting their biology, right? They're collapsing these entire ritual systems in their life all at once. So if you think about the military, right, it is one of the most powerful interaction ritual machines that humans have ever built, right? It is intense co-presence, it is strict boundaries, it is absolute mutual focus on a mission, and it is a deeply shared emotional reality. So the outcomes of that system are going to be enormous, right? There's powerful solidarity, there's massive emotional energy, and there's a lot of sacred objects like the flag, the unit patch, the uniform. So when a veteran leaves that system, really, they are being ejected out of their primary source of emotional energy and identity. So now consider the dual impact of injury and trauma, right? So a TBI, this is going to be an additional biological insult, right? It impairs cognitive function, emotional regulation, and social cue recognition. Add in trauma, that's the psychological and social insult, right? It's turning hypervigilance, right, into a barrier to reintegration into social life, right? And so the result of this is ritual impoverishment, which is how Collins describes it, which is the loss of EE, a loss of belonging, and the biological impairment in the ability and capacity to build new ritual chains. So now looking at like the HBOT mechanisms that rebuild all of those 3 domains, we can see that biologically HBOT works by targeting metabolic function or metabolic dysfunction, right, and neuroinflammation, and promotes neuroplasticity and network repair. So this is one of our most familiar outcomes with HBOT, right? And when this happens, this restores core capacities like executive function, emotional regulation, and attentional control, right? And so from a ritual perspective, these aspects is the repair of the participation hardware, participation in social life, participation in ritual. And when cognition, emotion, and sleep normalize, veterans become able to re-engage socially, focus on shared tasks, build routines, and sustain attention. But we are arguing, right, that biological repair is absolutely necessary, but it is not sufficient for recovery. So we are arguing that it opens the door, but it does not automatically walk the person through it. So behaviorally, HBOT is acting as a rhythmic re-regulation, right? The protocol is creating a predictable structure, the same preparation, the same chamber, the same staff, repeated across 40 dive sequences. And each step, right, is becoming a regulating ritual. Travel, preparation, chamber, dive, recovery. This is the structure that reduces uncertainty and lowers autonomic arousal, right? It's replacing those dysregulated cycles with stable, grounding daily rhythms. And this is exactly what Lende shows us, right? That our cycles, these kinds of cycles, are regulating emotion. And so we're arguing that HBOT instills a new stable grounding cycle. So at the ritual level, HBOT sessions function as a full healing interactional ritual chain, right? That operates simultaneously across attention, emotion, social bonds, and meaning. They are generating that EE, group solidarity, right? We're in this together, shared mood, which is that synchronized purpose, and mutual focus, which is just reduced distraction, right? And of course, sacred objects, like we are arguing the chamber now becomes a safe space. right? And so this explains why patients might report identity level changes and not just symptom changes, right? They're not just sleeping better, they're feeling like themselves again. And that is the signature of a successful ritual repair. So ultimately, this is the unified mechanistic model, right? Biological repair enables behavior re-regulation, which enables ritual re-engagement, which generates emotional energy and social reconnection. And this creates a virtuous cycle of recovery that is in itself self-reinforcing. And each domain enables the next, right? And each domain is necessary. So this model is arguing why ritual is connected to HBOT, right? And in this model, the inward spokes are representing the theoretical and biological engines driving change, right? So the trauma loops, ritualized cycles, autonomic regulation, neuroplasticity. The outward spokes show what recovery looks like as it becomes lived, meaningful, and self-sustaining. So the HBOT protocol creates predictable structures, right, which lowers autonomic arousal. Repetition produces emotional entrainment, which then accumulates EE through focused activity. The chamber becomes a symbol of healing, right? And symbols gain power through emotional use. The treatment interrupts trauma loops, shifting physiology, affect, and meaning all at once. And then the daily rhythm stabilizes affect, replacing dysregulated cycles with embodied calming ones. So ritual chains increase the perseverance, right? People return to places where they feel energized, and this is what restores identity. So this model basically gives us a mechanistic explanation for adherence, not just a descriptive one. So when we combine all three of these frameworks that we've talked about, HBOT emerges as a loop interrupter, a cycle stabilizer, and an energy generator. And so this is why this form of treatment feels transformative, right? It's restoring rhythm, meaning, focus, confidence, and reconnection. And so at that point, HBOT, we are arguing, is no longer just a treatment, right? It is functioning as a ritual system for nervous system repair. So basically key takeaways, right? Ritual is not just symbolic here. It is neurophysiological, it is emotional, social, and motivational, right? Therefore, HBOT is functioning as a biological, regulatory, and affective, relational, and a meaning-making intervention, which explains why transformations go beyond clinical metrics and why those 40 dives matter, right? It's the ritual chain needs time to build emotional energy. And so lastly, Lende wanted me to make sure that I put out testable hypotheses, right? So these hypotheses are examples of ways that we might test recovery as a biosocial process in which nervous system change, pattern repetition and relational interaction dynamically co-produce one another over time. So for example, the repetitive structure of HBOT, like the daily scheduling, the sequencing, bodily preparation, all those vitals, and train autonomic regulation independent of any oxygen dose. Repeated pattern interactions with technicians, right? Those small social interactions function as stabilizing micro rituals that shape emotional regulation, trust, and adherence. And I would argue across both sides. And then lastly, another example could be motivation and engagement increase non-linearly across the 40 dive sequence as ritual chains stabilize and emotional energy becomes self-sustaining. And yeah, that is all. Sorry if I went too fast.
No, it was super good. Thank you so much. That was a spectacular. I really appreciate that expert sharing. I'm going to be greedy and start with the discussion. Well, first thing to say, maybe when you do the poster, you'll have a table of like the 4 domains of, the ritual and, like, for example, of the chain, I think has 4 domains. And then maybe you have like an example from data where you have like quotes from that. And you probably already thought of this. And then that way you can have the repair and outcomes you've already identified. Like what we're just doing is putting that data to like validate the model. Okay, then my question is, where did the unified model come from on the slide because there's like a first unified model and then the second one is like nestled over HBOT?
I built that. I
Very
built
good.
that based on the three, suggestions that Daniel Lende's been sending me. Like he's add this, add this, add this. So I just kind of picked the three overarching ones and thought they really fit together to create this, like a virtuous cycle of recovery, right?
I'm like blown away. That is nature level science you just presented when you wove the theories into the unified model and then backed HBOT into that. Like that is just so good. Okay, and then my final actual question is how can we test the hypotheses that you presented?
So that was kind of like where Dr. Lende was saying this is where our discussion should be, right? Is these testable hypotheses. So I guess what I'm saying is like, I think I was trying to get at it in that poster proposal, right? Is like the ways and how we could do this, whether it's daily scheduling, sequencing, body preparation, right? How is that in training autonomic regulation? So what I'd love to do is, maybe even look at the aura, like what is their aura ring showing for heart rate, as they're on their way to HBOT, right? And then what are they talking about as their experience? And does their narrative of experience coincide with, with heart rate variability or with, yeah. So that I think we could look at that with entrainment, right? Whether or not the repetitive structure of HVAC is entraining autonomic regulation. So that we might need some of the biometric data for, but I'm just very big on mixing that stuff. I like to use it, but I know that's, yeah.
Oh, I think we
And
can
then,
get it. But yeah, I think we can.
yeah, and then, like when I went with the pattern interactions with technicians, right? There's a lot of, they're so proud of these folks that they're working with, right? It's like hanging their little, their wristbands as I've completed this and listening to how they feel about their treatment, right? These guys are excited. And I know that excitement is coming through in their interactions with folks, so I haven't really gotten to see the full progression of like meeting versus graduation, right? But I feel like there's so much data that's going to be based on that. But even like in the couple of observations that I've made, like the technician knew what show they wanted to watch. They knew what episode they were on, and not only did they know it, but they had watched it also and could talk to them about it, right? And so those small interactions keep people coming back, I think, right? That's how we test it. I don't know.
I think it can be flushed out, but I think everything you said makes sense. And just to let Chris know, we are recording this conversation and because we have a couple folks not here. But from the three of you, is there any questions or feedback or comments you had for Alana, or anything about, how we're aiming to apply ritual to our work? It's not that we expect now everyone's expert on this after this talk, but we're just wanting to start working towards getting everyone on the same page so that when we're doing observations, we're doing interviews, we're doing analysis, that people are understanding how we're operationalizing one of our primary, one of our 6 lenses, which is ritualism. So any other feedback, comments, questions?
Yeah, nothing of substance for me. It was really good. I mean, it's not a lens that I was originally familiar with, but I feel more and more comfortable, getting the goal and the perspective and the typical aim.
And again, I come from a more clinical lived experience space. Um, so even thinking about HBOT for people that I know of, the thing about ritualism was never part of my thought process. So being able to integrate that into this pretty clinical study, right? The larger study is very clinical. Being able to integrate that, I think, is really innovative and necessary because it does make a difference, having rituals and habits and knowns to be able to regulate your nervous system and all the things that really we want as outcomes for HBOT, right? So I think it's great. I think it's great. Thank you for doing that work. And I'm sorry I was late.
Yeah, I was also, I mean, pretty much saying the same thing. The presentation was it was great. It was very well done and very clear. Like the way that you presented everything, I guess the logic of it, it all built upon one like each other, and it made perfect sense. And same thing. I had considered it before, just through the literature that, like in the box folder, but really it has become very clear now that it really seems to have such an impact on these people's lives. And on the topic of, when Dr. Campbell had mentioned, for how we're going to test these hypotheses, I'm wondering specifically for the first one, I definitely agree. I think the biometric integration is fantastic idea and a really good approach. And I'm also wondering, could we also, throughout our qualitative data collection,
Yeah.
integrate that as well through the interview data, and kind of trying to see, maybe ask them specifically, like, how do you feel this has changed you, not necessarily symptom-wise like cognition, but more central nervous system, autonomic nervous system, things like that.
Yeah, and exactly. And I was thinking what we could do is look at, reported symptom change across placebo group and treatment group, right? And so that's an excellent way to actually test this hypothesis as well. But I was also interested in the treatment group, right? Just, the buy-in to the ritualized experience, and is that in the treatment group, excelling those changes, right? And so there was a couple of different ways I thought we could go about that. Yeah, good point, Caitlin. Thank you.
I think that's a really good, I know that Daniel and Jason had, and one of the things that they had been talking about, and I try to get a little bit with the cultural models too, is like operationalizing the placebo effect. And this is a great illustration of how that, of those mechanisms. Well, I'm going to stop recording and start a new recording, so we have two separate ones. Again, well done.